Here, the semi-finals of Grand Prix Birmingham. Hello and welcome to the semi-finals of Grand Prix Birmingham. Number 13th ranked in the world, Martin User with his black-red vehicles up against Leon Lahonen. Leon Lahonen on blue-white control, the dissenting voice in our final four. Martin User's list, you've referred to it as a bit more of a mid-rangey black-red deck than maybe the ones we see on the other side of the bracket. No one drops, that means that playing his tapped cycling land on turn one, I mean, that was about as good as things we're going to get for him on turn one here anyway. And on turn two, he's got a Heart of Kieran, and from early doors, he will be playing out threats here that at least pressure Leon Lahonen to have some sort of interaction in the early stages of this game.
Yeah, and the resolved Heart of Kieran is already a really good start for that. White-blue control can syncopate on the play, but now Leo knows that this Heart of Kieran will put pressure on him turn after turn.
Pierre Nillar is met with a disallow here. It can counteract availabilities, it can also counter just about any spell you care to throw at it, and that means that Heart of Kieran's stranded without Pia. It's a love story of broken hearts there, and Leo Lahonen just gradually building up his mana base. He wants to hit every land drop for at least these early stages of the game. His deck a little bit more mana hungry than what Martin User has going on here.
Yeah, but so does Martin. He needs to hit at least land drops 1 to 4. After that, he can go a bit slow. And of course, flooding is the big risk when you're playing against a control deck and the game goes too long.
Rekindling Phoenix the play here, and that gets a thumbs up from Lahonen. He just has to look on as the big bird comes into play, jumps in an airship, and chooses to attack Lahonen for 4 mana. Settle the Wreckage will exile that creature, but it does mean that Martin User will hit his land drops, and there are things that User can do with that extra mana. We already know that he has a copy of Walking Ballista in hand, and the more that you can cast it for, the more damage it can, of course, deal going forward.
And also the Phoenix is happy that Settle the Wreckage is already out of Leo's hand. I think Martin's start here is looking very promising.
Lahonen, no big surprises. Playing a land, saying go. A lot of his interaction is at instant speed, so no need to preempt things with tapping lands early.
And you can already see how valuable it is to have these heavy hitters instead of some maybe 1 power creatures on Martin's side of the battlefield.
Yeah, each and every card that Martin User has played really does demand an answer. You can't afford to leave it in play for too terribly long here. Lahonen taking an initial hit of 4, going to 16 from that Phoenix. And now it's going to be a matter of what Martin User plays next. He's got a Scrap Heap Scrounger in hand. Starts things off with Heart of Kieran, though. I guess that the Scrounger, an interesting one, that it's another one of these threats that ideally Lahonen desperately wants to be able to exile rather than simply send into the graveyard, because in the graveyard it's just simply going to come back.
Yeah, and this way Martin is actually still playing around Fumigate quite well. The Phoenix comes back, Heart of Kieran of course stays in play, and Scrap Heap Scrounger is threatening to get activated to get back. So Leo is already in a pickle.
It is pickle time, but there's a seal away in hand here for Leo Lahonen. Playing it on the Rekindling Phoenix seems pretty good to me here. I don't know which one represents a bigger long-term concern between it and the Scrap Heap Scrounger. Cast Out being played on Heart of Kieran, that the one sort of creature that Martin User has on the battlefield that is in some respects safest in the graveyard, but while on the battlefield it does represent a lot of damage, so it's getting removed here by Leo.
It also has Vigilance, so it's you cannot get it with Seal Away. And to be fair, there are not so many ways to deal with permanents outside of exiling them for Leo anyway.
User, he's only dealt 16 damage, only dealt 4 damage, leaving 16 left to work with thus far. And here's another copy of Rekindling Phoenix. I guess that if you're Lahonen, there's no reason to show your answers too early here. He can afford to take a few hits, and something like Settle the Wreckage can potentially deal with multiple cards at the same time here, which is clearly an exciting prospect for the Finn.
Yeah, but the sequencing here is very smart by Martin. He plays the Phoenix, sees if there is a counterspell, and if Leo taps out of Settle the Wreckage mana, then he would attack for 7. But with Leo not countering, Martin is not exposing 2 creatures to Settle the Wreckage.
Yeah, I guess that the dark side of Settle the Wreckage, against players who are happy to jam everything into the red zone, it's an incredible removal spell. Many paths to exile all in one go. If you're only sending in 1 or 2 creatures at a time, then yes, it represents a little bit of card advantage, but it's hard to get as blown out by it if you're already playing around it.
Yeah. Something I wanted to mention is that usually we see in game 1 the removal spells that the aggressive deck draws be dead cards. However, if your creatures are Phoenixes and Scrap Heap Scroungers, you can actually use your removal spell in response to a Settle the Wreckage to basically rebuy them as threats.
It's an interesting point, and it was a question that I was thinking of raising in terms of sideboarding for Martin User. Clearly, he would love for every card to be as impactful as possible in this matchup. After sideboarding, do you take out that removal just simply because you have more potent threats, or is it still worth keeping around for the reason you just suggested?
I think most of the removal you take out, but if you keep some removal in, that's certainly not bad for you.
So Walking Ballista, it does resolve for Martin User, but end of turn, Leo Lahonen using a big pull from tomorrow to ensure that he's going to be able to keep his hand well stocked with cards here.
Yeah, this matchup looks quite tough for Leo. Of course, Martin also playing it very well here, very patiently, not giving Leo good outs for his removal spells. I'm sure that knowing deck lists helps a lot as well. So
Fumigate here, yes, it sort of deals with this board, but how much does it really do? Because we've got a Scrap Heap Scrounger going to the graveyard, a Walking Ballista that simply takes a shot, and it's really the blink of an eye that follows up to deal with the egg that was produced by Rekindling Phoenix that is the sweet spot for that play by Leo Lahonen there. Making sure that Rekindling Phoenix does not come back, a pretty big part of that puzzle.
Yep. And Leo, of course, had that plan all along. Maybe he didn't have these cards in hand, but he knows that just casting Fumigate and allowing a Phoenix or multiple Phoenixes to come back is not a way to win this matchup.
So Teferi, the hero of Dominaria, making sure that Rekindling Phoenix goes somewhere where all the eggs in the world can't help it, that being back into Martin User's deck here. Only the 1 loyalty left for Teferi, so a little bit open to a Chain Whirler finishing him off.
Yeah, that would be the perfect card to have, but Martin didn't draw any Chain Whirlers. Actually, he's a bit flooded with unlicensed disintegrations.
Yeah, lots of copies of unlicensed disintegration. Magma Spray, another card that is, if anything, his worst removal spell in this matchup, because the line that we talked about killing your own creatures so that you can get them back from the graveyard does not work with Magma Spray at all. Meanwhile, Leo Lahonen here, he's on 9 life. I don't know if I would consider that fully stable, but it's, you know, living in that vicinity.
Yeah. It makes me wonder whether Martin maybe overextended a tiny bit with Walking Ballista, knowing what happened afterwards, because the way things shaped up, he didn't have the mana to immediately recur the what is it called? Scrap Heap Scrounger. And somehow the way this game has developed, he then proceeded to put a threat onto the battlefield that was Teferi. So yeah, I'm a bit surprised how easily Leo has stabilized here.
I mean, Scrap Heap Scrounger, still the potential for that one to come back from the graveyard here. So Martin User does have some persistent offense able to bring forth here. No big surprises seeing that Scrounger eat something from the graveyard. Goes for Pia Nala. Aside from the Scrounger, creatures in the graveyard not doing too terribly much here.
I think there was some discussion going on whether Leo's Teferi trigger was still in the stack or already resolved.
Teferi does let you untap a few lands in addition to everything else. You know, why not? And Commit here, able to put the Scrap Heap Scrounger a small ways down, and then Field of Ruin immediately after does mean that there will now be a shuffle. So rather than Scrap Heap Scrounger being close to the top, and indeed I think a Rekindling Phoenix being close to the top, now those cards just somewhere in Martin User's deck. Nice little interaction there, exploited by Leo Lahonen.
Yes, very, very well done. Using both Teferi and Commit in conjunction with Field of Ruin.
And these, the little plays that just help ensure that we can get a little bit further ahead in terms of winning with this blue-white control deck. And a little update for you from our other table. Simon Nielsen currently 1 game up in the red-black vehicles pseudo mirror. We noted that slight differences between those two lists, neither of them as different from one another as Martin User's list is from either of them. Over here we've got blue-white control doing a pretty reasonable job here of curtailing the early offense of Martin User. Essence Scatter on a Scrap Heap Scrounger. That's got to be a bit of a tough pill to swallow, because any time that you're putting Scrap Heap Scrounger in the graveyard, you're just delaying it rather than allowing it to fully be dealt with here.
Yeah, and Leo is running out of answers. You can see in his hand a Disallow, and that might be a Memorial to Genius. I'm not exactly sure. That's what it looked like. It's missing Search for Ascanta to really pull ahead in the card advantage race.
And Teferi's a good start in terms of drawing additional cards.
Absolutely, but a Teferi on 3 is being threatened by Scrap Heap Scrounger.
I mean, is this the time to cast Memory just to shuffle away that Scrounger and hope that your opponent can't find anything with haste?
But your opponent would just respond by getting the Scrap Heap Scrounger into play. So also giving your opponent 7 new cards is usually not what you want to be doing.
Fair point, Simon. Fair point.
I like it when you have the Teferi emblem, though.
Oh, yeah.
That's a pretty good play.
A time and a place for Memory. We're not quite there yet.
Another nice little piece of synergy there. Memorial to Genius comes into play tap, but untaps with Teferi's delayed trigger, so that you could theoretically use it immediately.
And blink of an eye there to bounce Scrap Heap Scrounger, drawing Leo Lahonen another card. Teferi is safe for now. How long that will be for, I guess we'll find out.
Well, now it's threatening to go up to 4, which makes a big difference, because suddenly a single Scrap Heap Scrounger hit will not kill it anymore, and Leo will be on a lot of cards here.
So the fact that Teferi using his ability there to put Scrap Heap Scrounger back into Martin User's deck suggests to me that there may be more Teferis in the future. And here we see Martin User using an Abrade on his own Scrap Heap Scrounger. He does not want to have to worry about that Teferi forcing Scrap Heap Scrounger into an unfortunate position. Here comes Teferi number 2.
Yeah, Leo has been using his Teferis very aggressively. Basically, whenever he had the chance to -3 it or to play a second one, he always just did it immediately to get the maximum value out of them. In this case, I think just letting Teferi, the first Teferi live for one more turn looked promising as well, but apparently Leo has been very successful with this hyper-aggressive use of his Planeswalker.
Memorial to Genius there, drawing a couple of cards for Leo Lahonen. And the moment where you get a control deck that gets given lands that let you draw cards, it's got to be a good feeling. I can't help but think that if Guillaume Wafotapa is watching, he is quietly nodding in approval. All right, Teferi in play. A blink of an eye, once again targeting Scrap Heap Scrounger. These Scrap Heap Scroungers really struggling to stay in play for any length of time here.
Yes, but they are maybe the key card to this matchup. The Scroungers and the Phoenixes, because they are the recurring threats that the blue-white control deck has to deal with. And as we've seen, blue-white control plays almost until both libraries are depleted. So it's not like you can just ignore certain threats. You have to deal with every single one of them.
Yeah, this is fully classic Randy Buehler-esque control that will try and deal with everything. There have been plenty of tempo control decks that we saw, especially earlier in this weekend in the Legacy, that could afford to counter, deal with a few threats, but ultimately they had this imminent clock to end games. That not the case for Leo Lahonen's control deck. It is absolutely required that it deals with essentially everything that your opponent has going on. Teferi, 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 and still not a thing to drink. And Search for Azcans coming down. That a pretty important additional facet to the blue-white control deck's game here. It does mean that there will be additional sources of card advantage very shortly indeed, because I'm pretty confident there are a lot of cards in Leo Lahonen's graveyard. And Glorybringer coming down here for user. That enough for Leo Lahonen to pull the trigger on his copy of Settle the Wreckage.
Now we're entering this point where Leo is just getting all the cards he wants. He will be able to flip, search for Azcanta. He will dig through his deck even further, getting 2-3 cards per turn. And black-red vehicles, no matter the version, just cannot keep up with that kind of value.
Modern user there checking out the graveyard already available to Leo Lahonen. And Teferi just casually ticking up now.
Yeah, and heads off to Leo Lahonen. He is playing this deck really beautifully. That's something, given that Teferi hasn't been out for a long time. It seems like he's been playing this deck for years.
I mean, I guess that even, like, the interesting thing to me about your statement there is that blue-white control has existed in some form or another for a very long time. Teferi himself, though, does seem to be a very different Planeswalker to anything that we've seen before in terms of the lines that he opens up.
That's what I think, yes. Maybe it just makes sense for Leo Lahonen how to play with that card. He has an intuitive understanding of how to use his abilities to maximum effect. And I guess you also get this bonus confidence from being in the semifinals of this GP, having used Teferi all weekend long to great success.
Yeah, he's got his practice reps in, and now he has to play against an end boss. Not the end boss, because even if he wins this match, he will have to go through one more Black-Red Vehicles deck to be able to lift the trophy. But if he can take down Martin User here, then Leo Lahonen has to feel like if he's going into this final, he's doing so with an air of confidence. And a game up now, he just needs to find one more win out of 2 to be able to take down Martin User. Now, while these guys get their sideboarding going, they've got deck lists out in front of them. It may take them a minute or two. We're going to check out how Simon Nilsson's doing in Game 2 up against Matt Brown here.
Very well indeed, Tim.
Yeah, he's got lands and spells, and Matt Brown doesn't even have lands.
Yeah, that is, I think, going to be a very quick look in, unless Matt can somehow draw a land and stabilize the board.
I mean, multiple Chain Whirlers. Sometimes they do clever things involving killing off creatures and maybe doing the last point to a Planeswalker. Other times they're simply a 3/3 for 3 when your opponent doesn't have enough lands to do anything. Now, Matt Brown passing back here. He's got Unlicensed Disintegration in hand here. I think he has a Chain Whirler of his own, but maybe looking to extract a bit more value from it later.
The Chain Whirler actually doesn't do enough on this board, so it's understandable that Matt is trying to stem the bleeding here. He will kill a Chain Whirler when it attacks. It's the right line, but it's still not super likely to work out for him.
Follow-up play of Pianalar here, going alongside Chandra. Chandra on the other side of things, the draw for Matt Brown, but if he doesn't have a land to play it, it's going to be an unfortunate draw for him. He does have another copy of Unlicensed Disintegration, but each turn that all he does is kill one of the creatures of Simon Nilsson, he's finding himself further and further behind simply because of the fact that that Chandra is still ticking up and up and up.
Exactly. Falling behind in the mirror match is basically an auto loss. If you don't hit land number 3, you're losing, and if you don't hit number 4, you're still very much in trouble if your opponent does.
Second verse, same as the first here for Matt Brown, but that includes him taking more damage from Pianalar, and this time round Chandra ticking up to ensure that we have Angrath the Flame Chained in play. If one Planeswalker was a problem, 2 Planeswalkers is a disaster here for Matt Brown. Just 3 life remaining for him, and I cannot see how he's meant to get his way out of this one.
No, Goblin Chain Roller is good, but it doesn't deal enough damage to deal with this board.
And there's the handshake. Simon Nielsen, we will be seeing you in the finals. The red tie there just at the edge of your screen is back. He's got the buttons, he's got the tie on, and he is ready to play for a trophy here in Birmingham. Leo Lahonen just looking on, little sage nod as he realizes what exactly he's going to be facing if he is even able to get out of this semi-finals here. Both of these players, Martin User and Leo Lahonen, just finishing up their sideboarding at present.
And keep in mind that Martin and Simon were the two players that took the somewhat risky draw, at least for Simon, to end in 7th and 8th place. Leo Lahonen is the 6th place after Swiss, so somehow it seems like being on the play is not all that great in this format.
Topsy-turvy land that we're living in. I know that there has been discussion in various other formats of when you find yourself in a red deck mirror, that being on the draw is worth at least considering because the extra card just more valuable than the early start. I know that has had some relatively strong feelings on both sides of that argument. I'm yet to be convinced, especially in this format. It's so early days in terms of what's going on with Dominaria standards specifically, but anecdotally, we do know that the lower seeds seem to have found a way of making things work here.
And that's a good sign. I'm not claiming that it's good to be on the draw, but it seems that being on the draw doesn't have such a big negative effect as in other formats, and that's always good to see. I think if the higher seed would always win in the top 8 elimination matches, we wouldn't enjoy watching Magic as much as we do.
We probably would have some very tense matches towards the end of the Swiss, though, as players try to lock up higher finishes in the top 8. As things stand, though, I think I agree with you. I like the notion that breaking serve is something that's reasonable to think that you might be able to achieve based on good draws, good plays, and making everything work for you, regardless of the fact that your opponent is going first.
Yeah, in the match we are watching between Martin and Leo, it wasn't really about who went first. It was about Leo having the right answers and playing, I would say near perfectly, maybe even perfectly, with how he utilized his resources at which moment he did these cute tricks that ended up working out really nicely, bouncing an egg after a fumigate, using Teferi's -3 and commit, then activating Field of Ruin to force the shuffle.
So here is Leo Lahonen's blue-white control list. He is in the process of sideboarding, so the main deck configuration will not be what we're working with in subsequent turns. But one thing that I specifically want to talk to you a little bit about, Simon, was, I mean, you referred to it as quite aggressive use of Teferi in that first game. Do you want to talk us through what you mean by that?
Yeah, so from what it seemed to me was that whenever Leo had a backup Teferi in hand, he would do anything to get that second Teferi onto the battlefield. So basically, replacing a low loyalty Teferi or -3ing the existing Teferi on some permanent that the opponent had. So basically getting the most value out of the Planeswalker in play and the one in his hand. In other formats, in other standard formats in particular, you would not do that. You would have your Planeswalker and you would say, okay, the next attack will not kill this Planeswalker. I will be patient and wait until it's down to, let's say, 1 or 2 loyalty before replacing it. And I think something about Teferi just makes it so attractive to keep. It's a certain velocity. It's you're speeding up with your control deck the more Teferis you're casting. That's how it feels like.
I mean, I guess that the more times that you are able to activate 2 Teferis in a single turn, the more that you're able to potentially push yourself ahead earlier in the game. On the other side of things, let's have a look at what Martin User's got going on here. There are quite a few cards here that I can see in his sideboard that seem like they will be instrumental in turning this around if Martin User is able to turn it around.
Oh, Tim, this game 2 will be very, very different from game 1. 2 Bloodfasts, a backup Chandra. We can not really use the cut side of Cut to Ribbons, but Ribbons is a powerful effect. 2 Doomfalls, 4 Duresses, an extra Glorybringer. Martin can change his deck so significantly, we will almost not recognize it anymore.
And there are a couple of cards here that seem like very obvious removals. The Magma Sprays in particular really don't do very much, and even looking at the sideboard of Leo Lahonen, they still don't seem like they're ever going to be any good. I'm interested in the Abrades and the Unlicensed Disintegrations. It seems likely that they're probably coming out to some extent, but if a couple of them have to hang around, how bad is that for Martin?
Well, I think as we've seen in game one, he cannot afford to draw too many of these effects. I still like, for example, using a Braid on a Rekindling Phoenix in response to some exile effect. Definitely not too many of them after sideboarding. Is Leo Lahonen bringing in History of Benalia, though? I don't think that this is part of his plan against Black-Red vehicles.
Yeah, not quite sure there. I like History of Benalia as being a way of upsetting the apple cart in terms of people's expectations for what blue-white control's trying to achieve. I've seen other blue-white control lists that are maybe bringing in Lyra, the Angel, to be able to fly over, but actually, if all that means is that on the other side of things people hold on to one removal spell, then it's easy enough for them to have counterplay against that's not too strong. Whereas
I think that makes a lot of sense, right? Lyra is a 5-mana single card threat, and History of Benalia is a 3-mana single card threat, but once it resolves, it actually produces more and more threats.
Now, Leo Lahonen here, he has had to take a mulligan here. You see him scrying, which means that he has found a hand that he feels that he can keep. It's got lands, it's got spells. Has it got a chance? Well, he's sat at the table. He's got more of a chance of winning this GP than I have at this point. Starting off with an irrigated farmland, Martin User, just mountains, no early threats from him, though.
Yeah, that Heart of Kiran was a bit delayed. Martin not playing around Syncopate, just basically asking Leo, do you have anything to stop this Chain Whirler? And
sometimes people think of control decks as being slow. Certainly in terms of the turn count that they go through to actually win games, they can be. But the pace that Leo Lahonen is playing at here is pretty brisk. On the turns where he doesn't need to do a lot of complicated thought, he's not going to waste his time bluffing too much. Martin User kind of knows his list already, so there's no point going too far down that rabbit hole. Does have the disallow for Rekindling Phoenix. That's an important piece of counter magic here. And passes with 4 mana up, waiting to see what Martin User has next.
Yeah, Leo is not quite Shota Yasuoka, but he's not wasting any time with things that are not relevant. So you will see him be very quick with drawing, tapping, untapping, casting and resolving his spells. And that's something that you have to be able to do as a control player, especially when you're playing a deck that has certain matchups where you're going down to the last card in your deck.
Heart of Kiran has now come along for Martin User. And now Leo Lahonen with a little bit of pause. He sees a Goblin Chain Whirler, a second one coming down from Martin User here.
5 Mountains is a bit of an awkward draw for Martin.
He would dearly love to have seen some sort of black mana here, because it seems very likely that he has discard spells, etc., that he's really going to be wanting to deploy relatively soon here. I mean, the Goblin Chain Whirlers don't mind all that red mana, but there will be other cards in the list that certainly would prefer it. Fumigate here, the removal spell, which will deal with both those Chain Whirlers. Had that been a Settle the Wreckage, then we might have seen a couple of swamps eagerly bouncing out of Martin User's deck. As it stands, Martin User's follow-up, Pianalar alongside Heart of Kiran.
And this time a very aggressive use of the bounce spell there. Even though it did Leo so much good work in beating a resolved Rekindling Phoenix.
I'm a big fan of Blink of an Eye, and indeed its a spiritual progenitor in Into the Royal. Being able to bounce a permanent for 2 mana with a very flexible answer from time to time, and then that kicker cost letting you draw a card, just all upside all the time.
Yeah, deceptively powerful card. There's a reason you find it in cube lists, because it is just one of the most powerful bounce spells ever printed. I think we're entering the Settle the Wreckage stage of the game.
And as previously noted, I really don't know that Martin User is going to mind too much if he has to search up a couple of lands here.
He has actually been hiding a Spire of Industry from Leo, so maybe he wants Leo to think that he's lacking black mana, while he actually isn't.
So an interesting card in Martin User's hand here is Release the Gremlins. Now, on the face of things, I look at the list from Leo Lahonen and I don't see a whole lot of artifacts. However, I guess that at least Release the Gremlins means that there's the potential for Martin User to go wide if he thinks there's something else strange going on.
Yes, and Sorcerer's Spyglass is a thing. Leo is playing 2 in the sideboard, so bringing in a single Release the Gremlins can be a huge difference when it comes to enabling your Chandras, your Angrath, the Flame Chain, and so on.
Lahonen on 9 life. We saw this in game 1 that the life total very much a resource for these control decks. If you pass off and let yourself take early small amounts of damage, that does then mean that you have the potential to get 2-for-1s, 3-for-1s later in the game. And at 9 life, I don't think there's too much cause for Leo to be worried, but fairly soon he is going to have to pull the trigger on whatever removal he may have.
Yes, and the difference here, you might think this is exactly the same turn as before, but it's not. Leo now has 7 mana available to him, and 7 is enough to cast first Settle the Wreckage and then still have Disallow up. So if Leo goes for Settle the Wreckage here, the difference is that he does that while still being able to counter a lot of threats.
Now, Martin User, thanks to PNLR, has the ability to pump that Heart of Kiran. We see that he has gone for 1 small pump here. That enough to mean that it is an attack for 5 coming across from this Heart of Kiran. Enough to make it a 2-turn clock, Simon. Tough decisions here for Leo Lahonen. Another pump coming from Martin User. I guess that there is a temptation to let as many pumps as you think likely to happen resolve, because that's all mana that won't be spent on anything else. Cast Out now does deal with that Heart of Kiran, meaning that it's just PNLR and that little Thopter token working alongside. And now here comes Goblin Chain Whirler.
So now all these creatures are susceptible to Fumigate. No vehicle left for Martin User. He hasn't drawn any discard spells. I'm a little bit surprised, because I was sure that he would bring all of those in. This is good news for Martin, though. It means that Leo did not have access to a Fumigate this turn.
Seal away. Deals with Pia. Pia, with that amount of lands in play, does represent a lot of damage. And here's Arguel's Bloodfast. Now, there's not a lot of black mana available, and it's still a potent enough threat that a disallow from Leo makes a lot of sense. However, tapping down kind of low here. Oh, interesting. An Ether Mutation coming from Leo Lahonen. That another way of just protecting his life total a little bit here, meaning that Goblin Chain Whirler can just sit in play, unable to really deal any meaningful damage. Just a Thopter token left over, troubling Leo Lahonen's life total.
This is also a great answer to Heart of Kiran, of course.
Ether Meltdown, sorry there. -4 power to the creature or vehicle that it enchants, in this case, Goblin Chain Whirler. And here's another copy of PNLR. This is what we were talking about when we were looking at the deck lists. When it comes to Martin User's list, such a large proportion of the threats in it really are individual cards that generate a large amount of advantage and do need to be dealt with.
And Martin walked into Invoke the Divine here. By pumping twice, Leo was able to kill a Thopter token and gain 4 life. Had Martin only pumped once, then he would have had the mana to sacrifice with Pia.
Invoke the Divine, the kind of spiritual improvement on Divine Offering back from Antiquities, destroying artifacts and enchantments at instant speed and gaining you 4 life. Yes, it costs you 3 mana, but you know what? That's a price that Leo very much willing to pay.
And if you were wondering why a 0-power Goblin Chain Whirler is attacking, this is just a backup move in case Leo has Settled the Wreckage. That way, you're just getting a basic out of the deal, and your 0-3 wasn't doing anything else anyway.
Yeah, not too many creatures to be blocked in this particular matchup. And Martin User quite happy to tap out here. That Thopter, large and in charge, and it gets committed. Now, the way that commit works with creature tokens, they don't get to get shuffled into the deck, or sorry, put a few cards down into the deck. they simply get sent to exile. They are never coming back. And now we get to cast Memory.
Wow. So Leo is really, he knows no fear. His Teferis are just always working. Now Memory, he just believes that if he can draw into his power cards, if he can get things going from here, even though Martin gets the first untap, that he will be favored this game. Or at least that this gives him better chances than not casting Memory.
It's a funny one because Martin User does currently have, 4, 6, 8 mana available to him. Admittedly, currently all of it red.
Yes, but he's also very likely to find an artifact in his 7 cards. Actually, it's 8 cards because he gets a draw step. And then, what if his hand has 2 Duresses? Is Leo really going to be happy with the outcome? Oh, 2 Duresses.
Who'd have thunk it? All right, Martin User, you've been gifted an entirely new starting hand and indeed your draw step. Only this time round you have 8 mana available. What can you do with all of that? Leo Lahonen, the control deck, tap down low in order to cast that Memory. Just 2 mana available. So we may see an Essence Scatter, say, on the first creature that comes down, but almost all of what's going on here from User will happen unimpeded.
Essence Scatter would be huge here because it would deny Martin the black mana, at least on the 2 Spire of Industries.
And it looks like we are going to see some black mana from Spire of Industry here. There's a Duress. Let's see exactly what Leo is working with after that copy of Memory. There's a Seal Away. It looks like there was an Essence Scatter in there. Alongside Invoke the Divine, some lands, and a Pull from Tomorrow.
Yeah, Leo probably deciding that casting Essence Scatter on Scrap Heap's Conjure is not a good enough play because you're spending one of your resources to deal with an artifact that can come back from the graveyard, and you cannot, from his perspective, he cannot assume that there is no artifact and not enough black sources in Martin's hand.
Yeah, that would be a very optimistic play, and ultimately, as we're gradually working our way toward as we analyze this match, it feels like unless you're really back against the wall, you might as well play conservatively.
So what does Leo have? He has a bit of removal for certain threats, for creatures, for an artifact, and he has card draw in the form of a cycling land and that pull from tomorrow. Now, to me, Pull from Tomorrow looks like the scariest card in his hand because you can fight on the axis of 1-for-1 removal spells or counter magic. Fighting against 6 new cards, 7 new cards, that's a completely different topic.
Now, I guess that Martin, he's also safe to acknowledge that he does have a second copy of Duress here, so even after taking the big card drawing spell, if he so chooses here, he can elect to get rid of something else as well. It may be that he can afford to wait on that, though.
There's a funny thing going on here because he would like to resolve his Glorybringer, but if Leo still has Essence Scatter or Seal Away, he will not take damage from it if he doesn't want to. So even casting the second Duress will not really solve that issue. Maybe that's a reason to go for the Bloodfast instead, but then I think you really want to get rid of that Invoke the Divine so that you can actually outcard the control deck and not the other way around.
And not enough black mana to be able to cast both the Bloodfast and the second copy of Duress. Kind of a weird, clunky 7 or 8 cards that Martin User has been able to work with here. Ultimately does use Duress, takes the Invoke the Divine to set up that exact play just for a later turn in the game.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. And now you might even be super aggressive here. Just throw your cards into Leo's answers because you want to pressure Leo, you want to refuel with that Bloodfast next turn.
Yeah, don't forget we still have attacks potentially here from Martin User.
You know why Martin was thinking so long about this? Because he also has a black source that he can play. And he values that higher than casting a threat this turn.
All right, so Leo Lahonen very graciously, at least for now, leaving the cards that Martin User has seen face up on the table. Part of that, I guess, is just to cement in his own mind which cards User knows about. Glacial Fortress coming down. Lohonen's mana looking pretty great here.
Yeah, his mana is not the issue.
Everything else. That's all he needs to worry about. Literally everything that's not the lands that he has in play. A little bit of a concern for Leo Lohonen here. His life total, kind of on the low side. The amount of cards that Martin User has to work with, a little higher than he might like. This is definitely not a comfortable place for the blue-white control deck at this stage in the game.
Yeah, and Martin knows that Leo has had 2 draw steps to find an answer to Arguel's Bloodfast. 2 draw steps is not so much for a card that requires very specific answers. Invoke the Divine is in the graveyard, so if there's not a hard counter in Leo's hand, then this Bloodfast is most likely resolving, as we see here.
And this Bloodfast can get activated to draw a lot of cards in this matchup, because whether Martin uses at 16 life or 7 life, say, it's really not going to make very much difference to Leo Lohonen's ability to win the game. And paying all that life is a lot of cards drawn. Here's that Seal Away prompting a sacrifice from Pianala.
Okay.
Now, let's just double check the wording on Seal Away there. There are some of the enchantments that, when they come into play, it's not until they resolve, they have a sort of triggered ability that resolves. It looks like things are moving along nicely here.
Yeah, I mean, Leo was targeting the Scrappy Scrounger with the ability, so everything is fine there. There was a moment of shock there for me, because it looked like Martin had kind of depleted himself of black sources. He doesn't control an artifact at the moment, so this Bloodfast is actually not doing all that much for him.
Chandra, Torch of Defiance is in play for Martin User, and with 5 life remaining for Leo Lohonen, it may be that the Arguel's Bloodfast is the cherry on top that, quite frankly, he could put to one side on the plate and just worry about the cake. +1 on Chandra here, another 2 points of damage to Leo Lohonen. Planeswalkers can be fiddly to deal with for some of these control decks, and in some respects, having that greed in play, that Arguel's Bloodfast, it's like having another Planeswalker ability, having another way of drawing additional cards and overwhelming whatever it is that Leo can find in these latter stages of this second game.
Yeah, and this is how I expected Game 2 to go. Duress and Arguel's Bloodfast being key to outgrinding the control deck. And actually the commit was a risky play in the end. I don't think it really worked out for Leo, because of the 4 Duress package just really punishing him and his hand.
Just 1 life remaining here for Leo Lohonen, and it strikes me that it was very likely we're going to find ourselves going on to a Game 3 here. Well, it looks like Martin User's taking a turn out of Leo Lohonen's book. How about activating a Planeswalker, replacing it with another copy, activating that one to close out a game? Martin User squares things up 1 game each between himself, the 13th ranked player in the world, and Leo Lohonen. This is going to come down to the wire, guys. I hope that each and every one of you is comfortable, because we have at least 1 more game here in Black-Red Vehicles versus Blue-White Control. And then Simon Nielsen, he's just kind of pacing around the room, doing his power stance, getting ready for what will be a big finals for him, making sure that he knows exactly how his matchup's going to go. On one side of things, he could find himself against a Black-Red Vehicles deck that's a little bit better in terms of trying to be mid-rangey. On the other side of the table, Leo Lohonen's Blue-White Control deck, well, that's, if anything, the most different of all of the decks that we see in our top 8 here, attacking on a very different axis. Life totals, not a big deal, but you know what is? Controlling each and every threat that the opponent tries to play.
Yeah, and the best thing is you can just stand there and already see how your matchup against Blue-White Control might look like. You can take some of Martin's sideboard plans, and you will know what Leo is sideboarding in the matchup and how he generally paces the game, which spells he uses at which point. Everything quite valuable information. And if it comes to the mirror against Martin Juza, this is the match that they were playing, competing for top 8.
User won game 1 in that match. That was the point at which Simon Nielsen elected to take the draw that had been offered by Martin User. Martin re-offered, having won game 1. he was very confident that he was going to make it into the top 8, even with a draw. And ultimately, Simon Nilsson, he snuck in there at 8th. It was Rob Catton that just missed, I think, in 9th place.
Yeah, Martin was asking for a little bit of good karma on Twitter, having given the draw to a player being 1 game up. And it looks like the karma gods have not been too unkind.
Yeah, they're very quick these days in responding to such.
Yeah, it doesn't
appeals.
take a lifetime anymore or a rebirth. You just 1 hour later.
Boom. I mean, the wonders of the internet, right? Previously, you had to write a letter, maybe send a pigeon. These days,
Twitter.
A few characters, send it off at the right names, and you're all sorted. All right, so these players just shuffling up as they go to their deciding game. I can't imagine that huge amounts changes in terms of the play or the draw here based on sideboarding, but I guess that maybe a little bit of insight into how each other has sideboarded might influence some decisions going forward here.
Yes, for example, we didn't see a single artifact from Leo, so Martin might want to take out that, release the gremlins. Leo was sitting there with his Invoke the Divines. He had to use them on Thopters. They didn't look great, although using it on a Bloodfest would have maybe been valuable. I'm not a big fan of these very specific answers when you're the control deck, because you already have counter magic, and that's your best way of dealing with arbitrary threats.
All right, Martin User, he's already presented his deck. He's very keen to keep these matches going. He's so close to getting another trophy. I can't imagine what it must be like going into Martin User's house, just trophies littered around all over the place. It must be quite an untidy looking place when you have that many different memorials of success to your magic. Is there one room that's full of them? Does he have one in each room?
Tough life, Tim. I really feel for Martin here.
Where do you keep your Pro Tour trophy, Simon?
It's right next to the giant check. When you enter the living room, on top.
Just you can't help but not see it. The gigantic trophy in this check just pointing out.
It's a bit more subtle. You'll need a few minutes until you spot it.
But once you do, you can't look away. Just basic lands on both sides here to kick things off. Leo Lahonen on the play, of course, in this deciding game. No duress turn 1, though. An argument to be said that there wouldn't need to be the duress super early here for Martin User. Plays a Hardened Kieran on turn 2, and that does resolve.
Yeah, that's a good point. You don't really need a super early duress, because you can also use it to clear the way for a threat, or to make sure that your opponent cannot cast Settle the Wreckage when they want, or just to make the informed decision whether Settle the Wreckage is something you will have to play around or not.
Well, Gideon the Trial's coming down there, and +1 to bubble the Heart of Kieran to prevent all damage that permanent would deal until the next turn. This definitely represents a change of pace in what Leo Lahonen is trying to do after sideboarding. Yeah,
and it's quite fascinating. Dominaria has changed this standard landscape quite a bit, but the power level of these decks is still really, really high. If you see what they can do when they're really operating at maximum capacity, so to speak, Heart of Kieran, Goblin Chainwhirler, now maybe a Chandra, it's really quite the powerful format still.
Okay, so once more we see Gideon ticking up in order to make it so the Heart of Kieran is not going to be dealing any damage here, and Spire of Industry still making the most of the fact that there is an artifact in play, tapping for black and meaning that there can be a duress employed here on Leo Lahonen.
Yeah, Spire of Industry, the MVP.
All right, in response, looks like we got a blink of an eye. Goblin Chainwhirler will not be attacking this turn.
Yeah, a little tempo play by Leo, but tempo plays are not how this matchup is decided. You need to really stabilize. And now, what is somebody like Martin User, 13th in the world, going to do with all this knowledge? Which kind of answers is he trying to take away from you to make sure that he can beat this, well, first this Gideon and then you?
Well, let's take a look at the options that he has available to take with this duress. There's a disallow in there. That will counter just about anything. Settle the Wreckage, one of Leo Lahonen's sources of big card advantage. He can seal away just the one threat, though right now Heart of Kieran a pretty awkward threat to try and employ that one on there. And The last one there looks to be an Invoke the Divine, able to deal with artifacts or enchantments. So it could deal with the Heart of Kiran, but it's probably at its best if it works out that Arguel's Bloodfast coming along.
Yeah, but I mean, there's also currently a Gideon, so singular threats can be handled. Martin's hand is actually a bit funny with the Goblin Chain Rollers there. I think in general, the Disallows are the most powerful card that Leo has in hand, because everything else you can play around. You can do, you can allow Leo to do 1-for-1 trades, and really you decide what Leo gets to kill with it. If Leo gets into a position where they just have a counter up, then it just becomes so much more difficult for you.
Well, ultimately does go for Settle the Wreckage there. At least he knows about the Disallow. Plays a Goblin Chain Whirler, drops Gideon of the Trials back down to 3. No point attacking here with the Heart of Kiran, because it did get bubbled last turn with the +1 ability of Gideon of the Trials.
Yeah, and something very similar will happen again, I assume.
Leo Lahonen, his draw for the turn, getting shuffled into the hand. I think it's a Sorcerer's Spyglass that he found there.
There is the artifact.
All right, so we saw one player's hand. Now we get a chance to see the other. Perfect information going on here. 2 more copies of Goblin Chain Whirler alongside Walking Ballista and that Phoenix down at the bottom there. Nothing getting removed from this hand, but Leo Lahonen will have a choice to make as to what he wants to stop from being activated here.
Well, most likely it's Heart of Kiran. And otherwise you're going to take Walking Ballista if we're talking about permanents that are visible here. Of course, maybe Leo has a very advanced plan already, thinking about a card that's not currently in Martin's hand, but I would be very surprised about that. If you want to turn off Scrappy Scrounger, for example, but if your opponent didn't draw any until now, it shouldn't be the biggest concern.
Scrapheap Scrounger was identified by you as one of the cards that when the game goes super long, which if Leo Lahonen's going to win, the game will go super long, a card that can be problematic. But we know that there's more than one copy of Sorcerer's Spyglass in Lahonen's deck, so it may be that the more imminent threats of what's in Martin User's hand right now worth naming with a Spyglass, and he does appear to be going for that Heart of Kiran. Occam's Razor, sometimes the obvious choice is the best one, and that's what he goes for.
I mean, if you look at this board, now you get to plus Gideon on the Goblin Chain Roller, guaranteeing that Leo does not take any damage, and Gideon does not take any damage this turn.
I definitely like that. Passing with a little bit of mana up, though, to be fair, he cast the spell that Martin User didn't know about, meaning that User still working with pretty much perfect information here.
Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the decision to take Settle the Wreckage, because now that Leo is delaying things for so many turns, at some point, are you really going to attack Leo as if they are not holding Settle the Wreckage? This could be a really tricky spot.
Goblin Chain Whirler coming in here, still bubbled.
Worth a try.
Goblin Chain Whirler just loves to attack. He's not there for blocking.
Yeah.
Not in this matchup.
I mean, look at him.
Send a message.
The secret is once you get going, never stop, or something like that. Not the flavor text expert, but
momentum, very much a thing. I mean, if you're spinning chains all around you, the last thing you want to do is just stand around for a bit. All the chains just fall to the ground. Once you get moving, don't stop.
Yeah. Living up to its name. Now, this is really funny. Martin allowed Leo to use 2 mana on his turn to seal away a creature that didn't have to attack, that just attacked for really virtually no reason.
And I guess User knew about the seal away. So are we actually seeing that attack was a sneaky play to get an exile effect used on a creature that could have been removed by some other removal spell, so that later Scrapheap Scroungers are a little bit safer?
So did Martin just trick Leo in the most advanced fashion, or did he just somehow mess up the Gideon trigger?
Someone got tricked here. We're just not quite sure who.
Yeah.
I guess that means that we got tricked. That sucks. Okay, so Gideon of the Trials still in play here, still able to tick up. Heart of Kiran and Goblin Chain Whirlers not really achieving too much just yet. And Leo Lahonen on 17 life with 6 lands in play has to be feeling pretty good about this situation.
No, I mean, look at his hand size. He still hasn't really achieved any value plays. He's traded a bunch 1-for-1, and that Gideon has been kind of a pseudo pacifism. But ultimately, both players are operating on very similar resources. I wouldn't feel happy on as the control deck. No Search for Ascanta, no Teferi, and no Pull from Tomorrow. And as we all know, Gideon of the Trials is really bad at winning games.
Good at making sure that no one wins the game if he can stay in play.
Yeah, his expertise is not losing.
Fumigate, though, that may help a little bit.
But still, a 1-for-1 trade, not what you want as the control deck. Is Leo a bit rattled, maybe?
Possibly. I mean, this is a high-pressure situation for him. He's played at the World Magic Cup in team play and done very well for himself there. But this is an entirely different beast. You're in the semi-finals of a GP here.
It seems he's getting somehow slower, less confident about his moves here. Why do you cast Fumigate when you can Gideon the Chain Whirler? Is he being afraid of cards that Martin might have? I'm really a bit surprised.
Maybe that Goblin Chain Whirler attack had a few extra little bits of impact. He's managed to get in Leo Lahonen's head here. Rekindling Phoenix, quite the potent threat. 4 of them in the main deck for Martin User. A 4/3 flyer for 4, just, a base rate. That's not a terrible position to be in. And then the fact that when it dies, if you aren't able to crack that egg, it will just come back, means that it's a difficult one for many decks to deal with. All right, so we have a Doomfall here from Martin User. Target opponent exiles a creature he or she controls, or indeed reveals their hand. You get to choose an on-land card to exile. The first ability, not so good, but that discard, definitely adding up. Invoke the Divine, going away. Should actually be an exile, there we go. May prove relevant with the likes of Search for Ascanta later, counting graveyards and so on and so forth.
And once again, I'm a little bit surprised by that decision, because after having taken Settle the Wreckage, I would have thought that not allowing Leo Lahonen too many exile effects was part of Martin's plan. Now he's allowed him to keep that seal away, which of course deals with the Phoenix.
So Walking Ballista coming along here. There is a copy of Commit in hand, and Leo willing to use it here.
And I suppose that was the reason for taking Invoke the Divine. It was just an immediate answer to Walking Ballista in Leo's hand.
Disallow the pickup here for Leo Lahonen. That a lovely draw for him, meaning that he can continue to stymie the best efforts of Martin User to get anything going here. And with an extra copy of Heart of Kiran in hand, Martin User really relying on the top of his deck to find something good. Finds Arguel's Bloodfast, but look, there's the disallow.
Just in time. What a close game. If Leo doesn't have disallowed that turn, I think he just loses to the Bloodfast. Martin is even slow rolling a black land. Still no Teferi, no Pull from Tomorrow. These are the cards that mean that Leo has success. Oh, there is Pull from Tomorrow in his hand.
All right, we could be in good shape here. Gideon of the Trials ticking up and up and up, just constantly dealing with that Rekindling Phoenix.
Yes, main phase.
All right. Now, why main phase rather than end of turn?
Well, you're getting the same amount of cards and you're not holding any counter magic either way. So by doing it this way, he is getting the most out of this turn. If he wants to make a land drop, he can. And playing against Martin here, he knows that it doesn't really make a difference if he bluffs a counter or not.
All right, so Martin User has a turn here where he's going to be able to do something, knowing that there's no counter magic on the other side of the table. So it looks like there's just a small issue that we're just trying to clear up here that you guys in the chat have spotted. Our roving correspondent, Raf Levy, heading across to see the judges to make sure that everything's okay. They were just double checking, I believe, to make sure that the commit put the card in the correct place in Martin User's deck. They were perhaps a little bit unclear, at least from our top-down view.
No, what actually happens there is because people are getting so used to playing with Teferi or against Teferi, that puts a card third from the top, but commit actually puts it second from the top. So
I see.
I think it's kind of your memory of what the card does getting replaced by Teferi's ability. So you just shortcut it to, yeah, sure, the third card from the top. Because four effects in your opponent's deck do exactly that. One of them second from the top. Good catch.
All right, so 6 mana, here's Walking Ballista, and followed up with a Dragon Skull Summit. So Martin User able to employ almost all of his mana that turn, but Leo Lahonen now suddenly looking at a whole grip of cards.
It's good that we have Twitch chat. Keep things honest.
Thank you, those of you watching at home. We appreciate those of you that are watching and commenting in the chat. We also appreciate those of you that are just watching and enjoying the games. As long as you're joining us for a little bit of Magic the Gathering, we're very happy that you're here. And right now, Leo Lahonen very happy to have a few extra cards to be working with. Yes, he's facing down a Walking Ballista alongside that Rekindling Phoenix, but I believe that he's got answers to at least one of those cards in his hand, thanks to all of that card drawing that we saw last turn.
He found a Teferi, so that's the important bit. He also has 2 cast downs, and I believe a seal away, so a lot of ways of dealing with Martin's cards. It's kind of a funny standoff between Gideon of the Trials and Walking Ballista, though, because every turn that you activate Gideon of the Trials on Walking Ballista, Martin once again has the choice to maybe shoot at something that Leo has. Of course, currently there is not much to shoot at, but it's certainly an opportunity for Martin.
Yeah, Leo himself on 18 life. Gideon fast approaching a similar sort of loyalty level. These Planeswalkers, they are not going to be dying anytime soon. And at some point, I guess, that Walking Ballista might even gain counters thanks to all of the mana that's available to Martin User here if he's got nothing better to do with all of those lands. For now, though, it's Planeswalker Arama as along comes Chandra, Torch of Defiance, and it looks like she is resolving. She's gone up to 5 loyalty here. And 2 points of damage being dealt thanks to Chandra's ability here.
Yeah, cast out handles Planeswalkers, but not immediately after they enter the battlefield.
Yeah, as soon as they enter the battlefield, priority does sit with the person that has cast them, and that means that there's always going to be opportunity to use at least one Planeswalker ability before your opponent can do something to deal with probably the most powerful of all the permanent types. All right, here comes our cast out from Leo Lahonen. An abundance of different reasonable options for him to remove here. Elects to take Chandra out of the equation for now. And Lahonen immediately getting to untap. One of the best things about cast out, of course, the fact that it does have flash. You can play it immediately. Gideon now has a new target in Walking Ballista rather than that Rekindling Phoenix.
Yeah, what is super interesting game. Now it's clear that white-blue has the upper hand, but still, it's 6 lands against 7, a lot of threats. But here you see the main issue. Martin actually has 2 more Heart of Kirans in his hand.
Yeah, all those Heart of Kirans dealt with a single Sorcerer's Spyglass, and another copy of Cast Out now coming along. Targets Walking Ballista. And Walking Ballista, in response to all that, starts taking pot shots.
Yeah, not dealing any damage because it was still under the Gideon. But of course, ending up in the graveyard, which has a small benefit.
Yep, there it can get eaten by a Scrap Heap Scrounger. Otherwise, it would have just been lost into the void. And And now here comes Teferi, hero of Dominaria. There you see him.
How good has this Spyglass been?
Very
good. This is amazing.
And search for Azcanta. So we have 2 actual Planeswalkers, plus an enchantment that sometimes feels Planeswalker-esque in what it does for you, improving your draws greatly in either of its modes. And you can see the look on Martin User's face there. In the background, Simon Nilsson.
Taking notes.
Yep, carefully figuring out what it is that he's going to do against whichever one of these players is able to emerge victorious in this deciding game. And the longer it goes on, the longer it looks in Leo Lahonen's favour here for me. Now that he's got 2 Planeswalkers in play ticking up, that Rekindling Phoenix, it's just been kind of sat there tying up Gideon for a while, but now we have Teferi as well. And Teferi does not take very long to take over games.
Yeah, I think there might have been a missed trigger. Not that it matters too much, but well, Leo, I was a bit concerned for Leo. It looked like he was getting rattled. He was losing some of his focus because until then he had been playing such crisp Magic, so impressive. And I thought, Martin, I mean, no doubt has what it takes to take anybody down at this event. But I think he's found his match. Leo Lahonen might even just win this tournament, beating up 3 Black-Red vehicle decks in the top 8.
This reminiscent to me, if it ends up happening, of when we saw, actually I believe it was Simon Nielsen and co. all showing up with Rally the Ancestors to a GP, lots of copies of it in the top 8, and ultimately it was Blue-Black Control that took it down in a 1-2-3, going from the quarters semis finals in the hands of Lucas Plahon. Whether or not Leo Lahonen can match that feat, we'll find out if he can win this game and then one more match.
Well, I think he can. In fact, I think he's very close to it. Mountain, Heart of Kiran against a full hand, 2 Planeswalkers. Search for Azcanta or Azcanta, depending on what Leo wants.
I mean, we're in a spot as well where Teferi not that far off going for the ultimate, and I believe there is Commit to Memory in the graveyard. Memory draws a lot of cards, exiles a lot of permanents when it finally resolves. Getting rid of 7 lands while letting your opponent draw 7 cards feels a lot more unreasonable.
Also quite impressive how good Gideon has been this game. Not really under any pressure the whole game, just synergizing so well with the whole deck, with the seal aways, with the cast outs, with counter magic. Maybe even a reason to play multiple.
So our second Sorcerer's Spyglass coming down. I think that one was naming Walking Ballista. Oh, sorry, Arguel's Bloodfast. There we go. He pointed at the graveyard. It wasn't quite clear, and sadly, from this angle and this distance, I can't quite make out Leo's handwriting. And Martin User just revealing 2 copies of Heart of Kiran and a Mountain in hand here. I think that he's had about enough of this game.
I thought actually he was conceding, but I think he's just resolving the Spyglass trigger.
He's saying, you get to have a look before you name things here. I'll show you everything that's going on, i.e. nothing is going on for me. Nothing at all is going on. Just leave it, all right? Nothing at all. Carry on with your game, Leo. You've got all of these Planeswalkers, all of this loyalty. You've removed all of these permanents. I get it. Nothing's going on over here. Just win the game, please.
And that's why you only play 3 Heart of Kiran and not 4.
Yep. Martin User, he had it figured out before he even sat down for this tournament. Don't play 4 copies. You'll only draw more of them. Leo Lahonen here, he's got 7 cards in hand. He discards a redundant copy of Gideon of the Trials. Yes, a cycle. And we find an actual threat that can be played by Martin User here. Here she is, Pia Nalar. What could she do?
Martin also being very optimistic.
You know, Leo's Hollywooding it for us a little bit here. He's got a few decisions to make as to how exactly he wants to deal with Chandra's mum. Yeah,
it's not about whether he deals with her, but how.
I mean, given that when she comes into play, she also generates a token, there was a vague temptation to perhaps use an Essence Scatter on PNLR. Ultimately, that not the option gone for, though. Azcanta the Sunken Ruin now transformed for Leo Lahonen, so he gets the opportunity to draw additional cards. Finds an Essence Scatter there, why not? And there's the handshake from Martin User. There's Teferi in play, there's Azcanta the Sunken Ruin. There's so much for him to fight through, and his hand ultimately just not holding anything of any great consequence in order to be able to win this game. Big smiles from Leo Lahonen, but big smiles again from Martin User. He's picked up yet another fantastic finish here at Grand Prix Birmingham, and I don't think he can be too disappointed with making it all the way through to the semi-finals. Another check in the box for the Hall of Famer as he is able to again do good work. But now we know our finals. We're going to get a chance to see Leo Lahonen once again playing his blue-white control deck, which we have seen him deploy masterfully against a whole variety of red-black decks in this top 8, and he's going to be up against Simon Nielsen. After Martin User, Simon probably with the best Pro Tour pedigree of the players in this top 8, so this will not be an easy matchup. Simon Nielsen, he defeated Etienne Busson, he defeated Matt Brown. The number 8 seed will be up against Leo Lahonen, with the matchup being blue-white control, red-black vehicles, 4 out of 5 colours represented in standard here as we go to the finals of our Grand Prix here in Birmingham. I'm Tim Willoughby, this is Simon Gertsen, and we have had a fantastic time watching exactly how this standard format plays out. And you know what? I'm pretty optimistic about how the Pro Tour is going to go based on what we've seen so far. Do not go anywhere. We have one more match for you. Raf and Riley will be here to call the finals. It's red-black versus blue-white. Only one can take away the trophy, and we'll find out which after these messages.